Well, welcome to another episode of Patio Pondering. Today I have a longtime friend and former colleague from Britt, Iowa. Little fun fact, Britt Bombers, high school team there, used to be a powerhouse in baseball. A friend of mine, Jason Abbas, was from Britt, Iowa. Just obscure fact that you get when you hear on Patio Ponderings.
There you go.
But Mark Johnson and I worked together when I was at Hubbard. He led the swine sales team. I worked with him at Kent Nutrition Group, and he led the swine group. And I really appreciate Mark's journey through the feed industry. And we're going to dive into his ag roots and what led him to where he is now as a retired swine professional, enjoying life as a farmhand, swine show pig breeder, and a wonderful husband in Northwest Iowa. So, Mark, can you just kind of give us an idea where you came from?
Jim, so I was born in Jackson, Minnesota. My dad actually worked for Al McQuinn, who started Ag Chem, which was Tarrigators. And he ended up working for Monsanto. And he moved to Lester Prairie, Minnesota when I was a kindergartner, working for Monsanto as a sales rep. So, farmed with his dad, who died as a young man at 53 from a heart attack, and my grandma moved into town and they sold the farm. And we moved to Lester Prairie, and Dad was a Monsanto rep. And then from there he managed a Cominco American fertilizer plant in Lester Prairie. I was, going to school in Lester Prairie. Lester Prairie was home of Schwartz Manufacturing. They made buckets and farm equipment attachments. It was also the home of Lester's Buildings. So any of you guys that know anything about the swine industry, Lester's was probably the first commercial company that built larger scale hog confinement buildings. They had poured the pits, put in the slats, and had the polyfoam, which was made there in Lester Prairie as well. It was just kind of everything you wanted for a swine finishing building in Lester Prairie, Minnesota. And then in 1973, I would have been 13 then, my dad bought an elevator in Plato, Minnesota. And while all my friends growing up went to work for Lester's Incorporated, pouring cement in the summers, I went to work for my dad in the elevator. And I learned the feed business. That's where I learned agriculture. I started out sweeping floors. It was an old bagging mill. I mean, we'd get to work in the morning in the summer at 7:30, and there'd be pickups with loads of ear corn and alfalfa lined up down around the block to come in and grind their feed. And we had 3 vertical mixers, and we would mix it and bag it and send it back out to their pickup, and they would load it back in their pickup, and they'd take it home to their dairy cows or their hogs or whatever it was in the back of their pickup. And that's what we did all day long.
And those are recyclable burlap bags.
Yeah, it was all burlap bags. I can still do Miller knot in my sleep. Yep.
Miller knot, yes, the Miller knot.
Yep, I can do Miller knots in my sleep still today.
And it's been 50 years since you did that. Yeah,
it has. I mean, we had run a conveyor system under the floor, so the bags would drop down in the conveyor system, and they'd go out, come up a conveyor out, and load in the pickup. So we didn't have to lug them out with the carts. But yeah, that's. Then in 76, he bought a slip-in bulk truck unit that went on the back of a 3/4 ton pickup with a 5-horse Briggs & Stratton motor on it. And if you wanted to see a bunch of 60-year-old dairy farmers think they died and went to heaven when they could get their feed delivered to their feed room with a bulk and not have to handle all those bags. That was innovation back in 1976.
You delivered 1,000 pounds at a time?
No, that one was actually like a tonner. So each compartment held 1,000 pounds. Yeah.
Oh my.
But the downside to that thing was, anything about 5-horse motors, 25% of the time when you got out to the farm, it had gotten wet or something had happened. And you couldn't get the damn thing started. So, anyhow, so you learn to become a mechanic at the same time, too. But, yeah, and from there, we had a fertilizer plant. I ran fertilizer spreaders. I ran my summer job was running high boy sprayers, spraying 2,4-D and Roundup. And, yeah, I grew up at the elevator. That's how I spent my time. That's where I earned my money. That's my dad paid me to work, and, albeit slave labor, it felt like most times.
Yeah.
But that's how I learned agriculture. That's how I learned about farmers. That's how I learned to work with farmers and just come to appreciate farmers. Baled hay in the summer. Did all those ag jobs. And then in the 80s, Dad lost the elevator. The ag crisis. Accounts receivable got him. It was one of the hardest things. I had left for college. One of the hardest things for me to watch was some of my dad's best friends filed bankruptcy, and it ended up taking his business down. He had to sell it. He got fortunate. The guys from Big Game bought it, but that was a hard time when the farm crisis hit because it just was. There was nobody's fault really per se. Banking industry, in my humble opinion, it was no different than the swine stuff we went through later on in my career, where they looked at swine financing from a feed company as equity. The banks learned a lot through those, that equity is really equity. It can't be false equity. But anyhow, that's kind of my background. That's how I got started in ag. It was the feed industry through working at the feed mill. Yeah.
And you were in a part of the feed industry that was when we were learning to be a feed industry, right? Would you say that?
For sure. Absolutely. I mean, Jim, I can remember when I was 14 years old and we'd get a railroad car of fish meal in 100-pound burlap bags, right? I mean, that's how we handled fish meal. I mean, we put up some bins so that we could get tandem loads of soybean meal, but before that, everything was in bags. So all the ingredients you put in the mixer were, ground off a pickup and hauled into the mixer with a 100-pound gunny sack. I mean, there was no paper bags. It was all 100-pound gunnies. But that was the feed business, But there was 30 milk cows on a farm. There was 10 or 15 sows on a farm, 100 chickens. But every farm had it. So, you'd have 10 farms on a section, all with milk cows, pigs, chickens.
Yeah.
And good looking farm girls. So, 'cause they knew how to work. They knew how to work. Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah.
I digress.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We didn't have anything off limits, but I think we'll make that one off limits.
Okay. That's fine.
But that part of the feed industry, you were working in the time of agriculture where you could make money on a quarter section.
Oh,
and you
yes.
could feed a family.
Yes.
And now I'm doing the numbers on our 550 acres, and I don't know if this will be the year that we need to throw up our hands and say, this is too freaking hard.
Yeah, I look, one of the things I'm doing now that I'm retired is I've got some good friends from church just down around the corner, and I help them in the spring and the fall. And they're longtime farmers, and just the change in commodity prices has changed their lifestyle. And they're established. And we're farming 2,500 acres. Dad and his son, and they're not in excess, but the change in commodity prices and there's no less expense going in. Inputs haven't come down. It's changed the way they're living. And I can tell you, being a deacon in our church, I can tell you that the change in the ag economy has changed our church right now. The giving in our church is down because we're an ag church. It's not easy out here in agriculture. There is something to scale.
Well, I think that we romanticize that period when you were learning the ag industry there in the 70s, as the good old days. Well, we've traded hard work, hard labor, and the diversity for larger dollars and larger land. Is that fair?
That's fair. And Jim, and the other thing, I think one of the components is, I think back to the 70s, especially the 70s, and even the early 80s. When the farm crisis hit, it all changed then. But, a lot could be said that, in the 70s, the farmers were actually kind of the working poor. They worked hard, but they weren't making a lot of money. And I think they looked at their town folk friends and everybody else, and they decided they didn't want to be poor anymore. If they're going to work that hard, I want to make more money than I'm making, and that meant being bigger. More cows, more sows, more land, whatever it was. It meant they had to be bigger so that they'd generate more money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, instead of us going through and saying, I went to college and I did this,
yeah,
and I worked here and I worked there, you have experienced two massive sea changes in the industry.
Yes.
Going through the farm crisis and seeing your dad lose his business, and you're right, he was fortunate he got to sell it. You got to watch your friends, families go through bankruptcy. You lived seeing Jessica Lange and the people hiding the sheep that we saw so that they could try and save.
Yeah, I did.
But you also went through the 98, 99 integration, consolidation in the swine industry.
Yes. Yeah, I was at Hubbard. In college, I went to college. I never got my degree, Jim. Whatever.
Now we're going to have to cancel this podcast.
Yeah, I never finished my degree. There was a point in my life I always thought I wanted to go back, but there was never time enough to go back. And I didn't need it because I rose to the level that I wanted to rise within Hubbard Milling Company or Ridley or whoever you want to call it. And I made a choice once I got there. It's really not where I wanted to be. But, at Hubbard, talk about 98. We were on the front end of the financing to grow. You remember how it was, Jim. We were wanting to put 2,400 sow units together and have local guys come together in one bigger sow unit, try and catch some economies of scale and size. And Farm Credit or at Compeer today, they wanted 30 or 40% equity into those, and they would loan them the money and build it. And heck, the feed companies would come in with 30% of that in a loan. It was never equity, but the lenders looked at it as equity. And we as a feed company, we got margin for putting our money in there. Well, 98 hit and blew the crap out of that because the model was broken.
Okay, audience, sorry for a little bit of glitch. We had a technical difficulty in Britt, Iowa. The hamsters that run the internet power apparently ran out of energy, and Mark had to reconnect.
The clouds got too close to the antennas on top of the elevator down.
Exactly. You didn't have your aluminum foil on the rabbit ears just right.
Correct. I got the aluminum foil on my head, so
there you go. We're aging ourselves with that.
Yeah.
So, Mark, when we got interrupted, you were talking about how you were at Hubbard. You didn't have a degree. You rose to the level where you were comfortable or where you wanted to be as you were, and we were talking about that as preparing to go through the hell that was 1998 in the swine industry.
Yeah, the 98 was, we learned a lot about how much squeal is in a pig from a financial standpoint, because you know as well as I do, Jim, the feed companies were involved in these sow farms. We had money loaned out, and the banks looked at it as equity. We were getting margin, way too much margin. We might not have been selling concentrates anymore, but we were selling premixes and our margin per pig was too high, and 98 hit. You know, one could say 98 hit, and then PRRS hit, and then just a whole bunch of things hit the swine industry, and that model was broken. And sitting in a feed company, the model was broken for us too, because in order for us to do business with the larger players, which were for us in Minnesota at Hubbard was New Fashion Pork, Christensen Farms, Iowa Select. I mean, when I sat across the table from Joe Kearns at Iowa Select, we talked about margin per pig. We talked about open pricing. We talked about, and that was a challenge for a feed company to adapt to. And I'll give Hubbard credit at the time while I was there. We were able to look at the large swine industry that was emerging and decide we wanted to play in there because we had the plants. At that time, Ridley had came in and bought Hubbard, and Ridley brought a different mentality. They brought a plant like Mendota, and we were willing to take a look at that kind of pricing structure. And it was good. We did a lot of business with those larger accounts because we were willing to adapt how we did business and structure it accordingly. And you were there. I mean, I felt really good about the swine team we had assembled at Hubbard Ridley at that time. On the nutrition side, there was Musser and Lawrence and Hedges, and you and Meyer. I just think through the guys we had on the nutrition side and the swine, the sales side. We had Bankin and Steen, and we had a whole group of guys that knew the business and Vince. We just had a bunch of good people gathered in one place, and it worked really well for them. But then the industry changed.
Well, at that time, Mark. Oh yeah. Well, at that time, post '98, in the recovery of the industry, trying to figure out where they wanted to be, you kind of had a nexus of us Gen Xers, farm boys.
Yeah.
And it was boys at the time. There weren't many women in our circles.
No.
That we knew how pigs grew. We knew how feed mills worked. We knew how farms worked, and we just sold feed and made it work because we figured out how to sell based on price per pig or margin we could glean per pig.
Yeah. I mean, and it was, those were conversations that I always enjoyed because you'd sit across the table from, Bob Christensen, and he'd say, hey, Mark, this is how much money I'll let you make on every pig you feed them. It's up to you whether or not you can do it for them. And that was always the challenge, and those were the things we had to figure out. But that was a fun way to do business.
And from a feed company standpoint, Mark, it was an easy way to do business.
Yes.
And unfortunately, people don't understand that in 2024 and 2025.
But then the challenging part became, Jim, later on was you got your ownership, and we started in the U.S. economy. I mean, everybody wants to talk about it's all based on Dow returns, etc. I mean, feed companies started getting greedy again, and they decided they wanted to try and bury some margin in ingredient pad, and you figure out that an organization that's got 100,000 sows, they know what we're paying for everything. And in some cases, they were buying.
Yeah, they do.
They were buying better than we were, and we actually bought backwards through some of our clients when it came to some medications like Becadox and that kind of stuff. But that was about having an open relationship. And then, sometimes you'd get people in the upper management realm that didn't understand that. They only looked at the bottom line, and eventually that got screwed up too. So, greed.
But could you also say that it also happened on the ownership side, with the influx of New York stock market money, seeing some of those massive returns in the late 90s?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah, that changed the whole swine industry.
I remember working on my PhD work with a system that might be based in an area that is known for making peyote smoking utensils in
Yeah,
southwest Minnesota.
yeah.
And a 1,200 head barn was like paying for itself in 3 years.
Yeah.
And you're making
Yeah.
25, 30, 40, 50 bucks a pig in 1995, $96.
It drew so much capital into it because the returns were so good. There was so much squeal in that pig that it just drew in a lot of money. And then 98 hit. It was all over after that.
Yeah. So how did you work with your customers that in 98 and 99 didn't make it?
I mean, they were all just a little bit different. I mean, I can remember, Jim, you remember Sand System, right? There's one that didn't make it. And Sands got bought by, and I don't even remember the name of the organization. There was a couple organizations that came in and bought them, and I ended up working with, a couple guys that ended up being management people that, they came in and analyzed what happened with Sands, and they understood that we had millions of dollars as a feed company invested in that company, and they weren't going to pay us what we were getting. I mean, we took a haircut. Going from making $4 a pig margin and going back to the owners and managers of the feed company you're working for and saying, hey, they'll pay us $1.10. We either have the same volume at less margin or we don't have anything, right? I mean, yeah, it changed everything. It also opened the door for China to come in with, I still remember getting sold out for 2 cents a ton on a vitamin that came out of China.
I remember being in conversations at ADM where you lost the AS700 bid because it's a penny a pound or 2 pennies a pound.
Yeah.
It's stupid.
That was when the loyalty. I mean, there used to be some loyalty. Us old timers like to talk about loyalty. We had loyal customers. We enjoyed the business because there was loyalty. That was the start of the loss of loyalty that you had in the sales process. Yeah, it got frustrating.
Oh yeah.
But
so you went through that crisis, and I think you could also say that you were on the leading edge of the full ag crisis of the late teens, early 20s, leading into and including COVID.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's what broke me finally. COVID broke me. Yeah.
So was it COVID and how we had to deal with it, or was it COVID because we had to kill pigs and we didn't know what to do with those hogs?
All of the above, Jim. Being in the swine industry, at that point in my career, I was back in the sales side of it, focused strictly on swine, and actually was kind of enjoying it again because I got I told you earlier I made it as high as I wanted to make it in the industry. And once I got there, I really didn't like it anymore because you lost track of the customer, and it was more, well, we have to fire X amount of people, and they need to be fired by this date. And, you got to do it the day before Christmas or 2 days before Christmas, but we'll pay them through January, and I just couldn't handle that stuff anymore. I cared about my people, and it was decisions being made that, I didn't care for it. So, but in the COVID I was back in sales, and you got customers standing on pigs, and you got 350-pound pigs you can't get rid of, and you got 300-pound pigs you load on a semi are going to be euthanized and thrown in a hole just to be gotten rid of. I've never experienced anything like that. And watching farmers, producers that love what they do, care about what they do, know that the fruits of their labor was being destroyed, and they were having to pay to have them destroyed, let alone any hopes of getting any money for their labor, went out the door. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done, to watch that and to become a counselor. I was no longer a salesman. I I became a counselor, and that was hard. And looking back on it now, for all the wrong reasons, they did what they did during COVID, and we know today a lot more than we knew then. But it didn't have to be played out that way. That's probably the most frustrating part. That's where I wear my tinfoil hat. Retrospect is always hard. But
I don't think your tinfoil hat. Yeah, I don't see it because I think a lot of people agree.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, you were an ag too. I mean, we were considered essential, right? I mean, I was at Prina at that time. That's where I finished my career, was at Prina. And we were considered essential, and as long as our customers didn't care, we could go to our accounts. I'd hop up on I-90 and head over to southeast Minnesota every week, and I'd be the only one on the interstate. Maybe you'd run into a semi or another car, and I'll never forget driving on 90. I passed a car with a guy all by himself in his car wearing his frickin' mask. I mean, that pretty much was, that was 2020. It was just, COVID was screwed up so much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it did. Well, and from the swine industry standpoint, we're making money today. You got $100 hogs, $110 hogs, $4 corn. I bet there's places around you that are paying $3 for corn, or $3 something for corn. Less than $2.
It's not that cheap. It got that cheap for a little bit, but it's low $4s now.
Okay, fall delivery corn would be $3, but
yeah.
So even a $4.50 corn, $2.75, $2.80 bean meal, $110 pigs, you're making some money.
They're making money. If PERS is ravaging us over here right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I live out in Iowa Select and Christensen land. I have a lot of finishing barns around me. These dead boxes are full right now. I mean, it's but I keep hearing that on the street that PERS is really hot right now for these guys. But and you can see it when you're in the dead box. It's running heavy again.
So you said something that I think is what should be talked about with our young professionals. And when I mean young professionals, I mean 21 to 35, 40-year-olds. And I think I wrote it, you got as high as you wanted, and you were okay with it. So how do we make that okay in our industry? Because we're always told if you're not growing, if you're not climbing, then you're stagnant.
That's a good question. I mean, for me, I decided I didn't want to go any higher because I did have to fire 2 of my best friends, and I fired them before Christmas. One of them's wife was pregnant, and I paid them. I paid them through January, right, and then had another one of my guys, and it was, when things were getting reshuffled, I had a guy that was, one of the segments that broke off during this whole thing is the local markets, right? I mean, we tried to bring back some of the old brands and get after the antibiotic free and, the backyard farming and all that. And I had a guy that was running it at the time when I was at Hubbard, and was the right guy to do it. And, I was told I had to let him go, right? So, he did a meeting for a bunch of dealers that morning, and they fired him at noon. And then, another arm of our organization hired him back to do a different part of the job. Just, those things didn't sit well with me, Jim. I mean, from just a personal standpoint, couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to deal with it. I mean, nobody was ever. You never had any real friends when you were up that high. Everybody wanted to act like they were friends. You thought we were friends, but you're not. You're just a number. My life today, Jim, looks a lot different. The things I value today, I wished I would have valued more when I was 50 or 40. It's too bad I'm 60 now, but there's things that are more important than your job. You need your job to support yourself and your family, but it shouldn't be first.
Well, I'll be honest, Mark. You scared me when we worked together at Hubbard because you were management.
Yeah. I didn't want to scare people. I mean,
No. And you didn't come across as wanting to scare people, but you were management, so.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like the level was above me. I was scared of them, you know?
Oh, I bet. Yeah. A couple of those people were kind of scary anyways.
Yeah, they were. You're right about that. You're correct.
Yeah. As I've written over the past few months and talked about, your work family is not family. And I wrote about it that there's two things about that. And I'll get your input on it after I go through it. One, I think about the people that I talk to every single week for years. I think about Kevin Allman. I talk to him every week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day.
Sure.
Kurt Schoonover, I talk to him every week. Mike Edmonds, I talk to him every week. We didn't agree, but we talked.
Sure.
I haven't talked to those 3 in 9 months. Well, I've talked to Kurt once. The marketing people that I talk to every week, sometimes every day. I haven't talked to them in 9 months. So
I thought for sure Mark Nelson, Kevin Levi, I go through the management group that was at Hubbard when you were there, Jim, and who I worked and interacted with every day. I still talk to Vince Bach. He's up at New Fashion Pork. Vince and I, we still talk. But I haven't talked to Mark Nelson in 10 years, I bet. If you would have asked me when I was at Hubbard, I would have said he was a good friend. He was an acquaintance, right?
Yeah.
Customers I had when I was at Prina before I retired, I don't talk to any of them anymore. There was a couple of them I thought I got pretty close with. Mm-hmm. And you know what? That used to bother me. It doesn't.
So you've hit on 2 things: being comfortable with where you are in a company, and being comfortable that your work family is just people you work with.
It's just work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
2020, Jim. 2020 was a pivotal year for me. I mean, it wasn't just COVID. I mean, you think about what was going on in 2020, and I don't know what it was like where you were at. You were at Kent. I was at Land O'Lakes. I was at Prina. I mean, we all know the checkerboard. I mean, if you think about legacy brands, Prina would be a legacy brand. Coca-Cola, Prina. I mean, there's legacy brands, right? Mm-hmm. Prina was one of those. But Land O'Lakes, when you think of co-ops, you think they're a large co-op. You think, wow, I mean, they're all about farmers and doing what's right as a co-op, right? I mean, that's kind of your first impression. But 2020 was COVID, but it was also DEI being ramped up within Land O'Lakes. It was all about ESG. We had and she's still there running the whole company I don't know, this sounds wrong, but she was openly gay, lesbian, on the board of BlackRock, and she was driving an ag company that I was pretty sure my customers, if they knew what was going on behind the curtains at Land O'Lakes, Prina, with those kind of things, they wouldn't have been happy. And being in the organization, it bothered me. And Jim, you know how it is. I'm 60 at that point in time. Most of my filter has been broken or thrown away.
Yeah.
I never had much of a filter anyhow, but and my give a shits was completely gone in a lot of cases. Because I fought for my customers, but some of the other things were just. So you put that all together, and then throw in, Jim, my rise, my climb to the top in the feed industry at Hubbard, and I was at the top. I was at the top.
Mm-hmm.
I saw.
Yep.
But it cost me 2 marriages, 5 kids. It cost me a lot to get there, and I didn't know. I didn't have a relationship with Christ at that time. My relationship was with me and me only, and my sinful heart. And 2020 rolled around, and you know what was going on in politics, and that election that went on in 2020. I can remember stopping at a wayside rest on I-90, going to a customer's, and I pulled into the wayside rest, and I sat there for 2 hours trying to understand what it was all about. And I'm a 35-year recovering alcoholic. I've had 2 divorces. That was the start of my faith walk in 2020, because I had put a lot of hope in our government and in Trump, all the wrong places. And yeah, after 2020, I retired a couple years shortly after. I'd call it shortly after that, because I was done. I was just done. It had beaten me, but I didn't care.
But Mark, you work in ag, and we're so much better.
Yeah, right. What a joke, Jim. I understand the sarcasm. Yeah, I get it.
Uh-huh.
I get it.
Yeah. Well, you broached a couple of subjects that I knew we were going to get to. And I hoped we did, because you've got a story that, like I said before we started recording, I didn't know completely. I mean, I remember you told me about when you were in the dorm in Minnesota and you drink a fifth of Jack Daniels a night or something like that.
Oh, yeah. I'd spin the cap off a fifth of Jack Daniels, and the night wouldn't be done until that was gone. Yeah. I went through treatment. I haven't told this. I don't tell this story very often, Jim, but the night before I went to treatment, I was working for a co-op. I had left SuperSweet. I was working for GTA Co-op out in Tyler, Minnesota. And me and a couple guys from the fertilizer plant had gone to a singles dance in Tyler. I came home at 10 o'clock after drinking a fifth of Jack Daniels, and I walked in the door, and my now ex-wife was standing there with my 3-month-old baby, and I walked in the door and took about 2 steps, and I threw up on her feet and passed out. I went to treatment the next day, and that was 35 years ago on Mother's Day. Yeah, that was my first. I've been sober since then, and trust me, working in ag, being a non-drinker. But I distinctly remember one night in the steakhouse in New Ulm, Minnesota. It was Lattimore and Hedges and I and Bob C. and his management group. And Bob C. took me over to a corner and he says, Mark, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I really admire the fact that you can do what you do and not drink. He says, I'm proud of you for that. And that was from Bob C.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a couple other of our large customers. It just reinforced I was doing the right things. But it was hard being an ag and not being a drinker. I did a lot of designated driving.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of designated driving.
Yeah. So how did you become sober without having a concomitant, that's a fancy word, walk with Christ?
Jim, I grew up we went to church. Mom and Dad, we went to church every Sunday, right? So I grew up in church, youth group, did all the, I went on the hay rides and tried to cop my feel through the girl's shirt while we were on the hay ride. I mean, all the things you did when you were 15, right?
Yeah.
I guess in the back of my head, I always knew that there was a God, and it's only His grace kept me sober, because I had no relationship with Him, Jim. Because I we would go from management meetings in Minneapolis, and we'd go down to the strip club and spend the night there and spend lots of money. And, obviously not
on an
walking
expense
with Christ.
report.
On the expense report. Not walking with Christ in those days either, but he kept me sober. Grace of God kept me sober, Jim. He had something in store for me. He waited till I was 60 years old before I finally found him. It took I thank him every morning when I get up that he found me, because it's never too late. But yeah. But
so
he
was
kept
it
me
that
sober
2 hours?
through all those things, Jim. I mean, you were at a lot of the same events I were at. There was a lot of drinking. Yeah.
Huh? So
His grace kept me sober.
Yeah, and the grace is a perfect word, because I was raised United Methodist, and grace is a huge part of the theology that the United Methodists follow. And it is truly God's unwarranted protection, or whatever word you want to do.
Yeah, we don't deserve it, but
we don't deserve it, not at all.
No.
And looking at you, how as somebody that is devout, I guess, and looking at you, going, why does Mark deserve it? I mean, the judgmental part of me being a sinner and put myself in somebody looking at you. So that is cool that you can see that he gave you that. He gave you the grace.
Yeah, it's only his grace kept me alive through those days. He kept me alive through my drinking days. He's kept me sober. His grace brought Rachel into my life. I mean, figure that one out. I mean, I'll never. I can still remember interviewing her for that research job at Hubbard, and just, I just had this gut feeling. I don't know what it was, but hell, Jim, she's 22, my senior, right? I mean, there's a whole lot of things about it that don't make any sense, but there was, the grace of God brought us together, and I thank Him every day for her. But I've got so much that I don't deserve, and it's all from Him, And now that I'm retired, it's there's days, I wonder what my purpose is. But in the last few months, I'm running 2 men's groups in our church. We have a Wednesday morning group. It's a whole bunch of mutts that get together. You would never pick us out of a group to all be together on a Wednesday morning, or our Sunday morning men's Sunday school class. I'm teaching both of those right now. So he's allowing me to use the skills that he gave me as a man to do some good with them now too. And not that I didn't do good with them when I worked. I did some good things, but it's different kind of good for me now.
So was it the 2 hours you sit on that rest area? Was that where you felt that, oh boy, I got to do something different? Or did you feel the God touching you then, or was it after that?
Looking back on it, Jim, I'd say it was God touching me, yes. I knew there had to be something different. I knew there was something different. And it was, I don't know, 2-3 weeks after that. And Rachel and I had been kind of going to a Methodist church in Garner, but we really weren't going. We hadn't been there for a while. We went to the Britt Free Church here. It was it was the Sunday before Palm Sunday, and we went in there and we felt welcome there, and we went back Palm Sunday, which was the next Sunday, and they gave Rhett, who was just a little boy at that time, they gave him a palm leaf, and he walked down the aisle with him and went up into the front of the church, and he was right in front of the pastor, and Rhett reached out with his palm leaf and waved it at the pastor and said, "Hey, you're that long-talking guy, aren't you?" He said it out loud. The whole church heard it. And, Jim, I knew that's where we needed to be. God took me to that church. I was baptized next Easter in that church. But I knew there was something else. And he drew me to that church. I've got some of the best friends I've ever had in my life right now that have come through that church. Male friends. We all need male friends. Men need to be men again. We need to be the leaders. We need to be men, and that's another thing that I've learned. Just life is so different for me today, and I'm glad I retired at 62.
That was good. So you're in a position where you can do that. So you bring up a point that I think we could end the rest of our conversation with easily.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I struggle with, and I think a lot of us struggle with, is we need men friends.
Yes.
And we think we have men friends, but we don't have men friends. And the men friends we typically have are sitting there having a beer, bullshitting, talking about women, talking about sex, talking about cars, things that are men things, but we never talk about, God dang it, Mark, I'm tired of drinking. Or, daggone it, I don't feel like I'm in the right place. Or, man, I love my wife, but I don't like her. We don't, what has opened up your heart that you can have those discussions with your friends?
The feeling words that we don't like to address. I mean, we as men, I'm sure, Jim, you're no different than I was. I was taught at a young age that you worked hard, you didn't talk about your feelings, love was physical. That's just what I learned. I grew up with a dad that, I knew he loved me, but he never told me. And I knew, how I thought I got his love was by working hard and being the best at what I did. And, I had a dad that when I would come off the football field and I'd have 12 tackles, he'd say, yeah, but you missed these 2. You should have had 14. Right? That's what I grew up with. And he's gone now. I wished he was still here because I miss him. But we never talked about feelings. He never told me how to love a woman. He never told me how to love a friend. To me, love was that physical thing, Jim. So I couldn't love a brother like I loved a wife, or I couldn't love, you know what I'm saying? And if we're going to make it in this world, and that's the one thing I work with our youth group, the 7th and 8th graders, that I'm trying to tell them, find that friend that you can sharpen iron with. Keep him for the rest of your life, because you'll need somebody that when you have a struggle that you can go talk to about. And because we've been taught how to stuff it. And by stuffing it, you drink, you overeat. There's all kinds of things you do that come from stuffing your feelings. And we're taught from little boys to keep things stuffed. I can't, of all the things I've learned in the last 4 years, Jim, you need to have 2 or 3 male friends that you can rely on. Yeah. I think it's critical.
Oh, I agree completely. Yeah. And I've got a few that I can get close to, but I'm 54 and it's tough.
Yeah. Rachel and I moved out here to this acreage. We're in the middle, and we're surrounded by hog barns. My closest neighbor is a mile away. And, I always joke, it's the perfect place. I don't have to see anybody, right? I don't feel that way. Or there's people I need to see every week. There's friends I need to commune with. We weren't put on this earth.
You live in a dangerous place if you're not mentally stable.
Yeah. We weren't put on this earth. We were put on this earth to fellowship. Yeah. And fellowship isn't meeting at the bar and drinking and getting drunk. Fellowship isn't, having a few drinks with a girl and trying to get her in bed if you're not married. Fellowship is communing with the Lord. It's communing with the friends that believe like you do. And because life's too hard not to have somebody to talk to other than your wife. Because there's things that you can't talk to your wife about. because some of it is talking about her, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Going back to I love her, but I don't like her.
It's yeah. The Lord has blessed me, Jim. I'm not. I wear it on my sleeve today. I'm only alive because of Him. He took me a lot of places, but he taught me a lot of lessons. And I've learned from those lessons, and I try and share what I've learned. And like you said early on, I'm not afraid to talk about anything. I don't have a filter anymore, and I'm a function of where I've been and what I've learned from it.
So how do you handle the feelings of, I won't say regret, but thoughts of I should have done things different? And you've had enough experiences that it has to be things that come up, whether it's a sales call or it's a meeting or it's a contract that you should have done differently. Looking at it from 64,
that was the culmination of what happened in that 2 hours in that wayside rest, Jim. It was, I got 5 kids, my 5 oldest kids, Jim. There's lots of things I wished I could do different, but I can't change what I did. It made me who I am today. It's made me a better person and a better man. And shame is a sin to me. Shame is not something we're supposed to live in. And if we carry the shame with us, we'll never get past it. We have to understand that shame was being in a crucible at some point in your life. In the crucible, the heat refines you and makes you better. And that refinement, getting rid of that shame and realizing, I wished I hadn't have done it. I can't change the fact that I did it, but I can grow and learn from what I did and not do it again. And now at 64, I can also talk about it with people so that they understand how they can live through it and get through it as well. Does that make sense?
Totally. And you're not talking about I did it, you have to deal with it, move on. You're talking about, I did it, I owned I did it, I'm going to try not to do it again, and let's go forward, right?
Yep, exactly. And I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to draw off it. I'm going to share it. I'm not going to be ashamed of it. I'm not saying proud, but I'm not running from it. It's part of who I am today, and I think today I'm a much better person than I've ever been in my life, and that's one of my goals every morning is I want to be light and salt in this world. I want people to run into me today and say, there's something different about you today. And that's my goal every morning when I get up. And the difference today for me, Jim, is it's pretty easy. I start at the foot of the cross every morning when I get up, and I go to bed at the foot of the cross every night when I go to bed. And in between, I do my best to be somebody that He'll be proud of me and how I love other people during the day. That's the only goal I have in life.
Well, I'm not afraid of you anymore, so you've changed.
I have changed. It's funny. I shouldn't even say this. I don't. Joe probably doesn't even listen to it, but I've been a friend with Joe Kearns forever, Jim. I mean, Joe Kearns and I did business. Joe taught me a lot about doing business with large commercial accounts sitting at the office at Iowa Falls. And when I retired, Rachel would run into him yet because he did some work with Prina. And, Joe said to her one meeting after I had retired that, he just talks about Jesus too much. I don't even follow him on Facebook anymore. I feel bad about that because Joe was one of those. I still enjoy Joe, but through it all, but that's okay. I wished I still had a periodic phone call from Joe Kearns in my life that we would just talk, but, those are some of the things that in change, I wish that hadn't happened, but it happened and I can live with it. But I feel bad about it too, but not bad enough that it's going to make me change how I am. So, and I'm going to tell you. I've watched you, Jim, and the struggle you're going through trying to find your next career. And, I pray for you every night, my friend, whether you know it or not. I mean, you'll find something. I mean, I'm not so sure you haven't hooked into it and what you're doing right now with me today, but I'm not sure you need the corporate world anymore, but that's a whole nother conversation. So,
yeah, that'll be episode 2B for us. So how obviously you became sober before Christ. You were comfortable rising in the corporate world to where you wanted before Christ. And we talked about it on your sobriety. Do you think your comfort and being comfortable not being a college grad came from God's grace also?
Yeah. I mean, there was times, Jim, when I was climbing the ladder, I didn't feel like I deserved it because I didn't have my college degree. I mean, I struggled with it, but I never let it show. But, there's a set of skills that I've had my whole life that I'm pretty proud of, and I put them to work today in a lot of things that I do. But, there was a part of me that says, I'll show you. I don't need a damn college degree. And I can do this without
a little arrogance, a little.
I had a fair amount of that. Yeah. I mean, you got to have confidence, right? Blurred between arrogance. Yeah. But I never let that.
Well, you've left us with some heavy things.
I didn't mean to. But
no,
life is good.
That's why I've been trying to get you on for a couple months, my friend.
Life is good today for
Mark Johnson. Yeah. Well, Mark, I think I have a young friend that we're going to do a series of podcasts on mentorship. She's 24, 25 years old, been through a couple of things. She and I are going to talk about mentorship. Yeah. And I think there's some things that you and I can do to explore, talking to men in the feed in the livestock industry, in ag, because
it's needed, Jim. It's needed.
We are at a crossroad. Yeah. We're at a crossroad. I think I've been runner-up 4 times in jobs, and I know 3 of them are women, and 3 of them are younger.
There's DEI is real, my friend.
And
I can say that you can't, but I will say it. DEI is real.
No, I can't. No. Each company had a different set of skills they were requiring that I just didn't seem to have.
Sure.
Yeah, but I think we could follow up. I've got a couple friends that I think we could have a nice little men's round table, and not a men's as in we're going to sit here and dog on the world, but a men's discussion of hey. I mean,
I don't want to do
that. We can do that. We're really good at that.
Yeah. I try and stay away from that. That doesn't help. Doesn't accomplish anything. So
no, it doesn't. Well, yeah. So before we go to my final 5 questions that I ask everybody, and I'm looking forward to yours, I really appreciate the journey that you've had in 35 years of sobriety. I also appreciate that your lack of judgment of others. And I've tried to emulate that. My 235 days without a bourbon is for me. It's not for me.
You can't do it for anybody else.
No, but I'm not sitting here going, Mark, you shouldn't have a beer. I haven't drank.
Oh, yeah.
So it's me. It's what. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Sobriety is all about doing it for yourself. You can't do it because.
Oh yeah.
want to keep a marriage. I can't do it for my kids. I can't, because ultimately it's about yourself. You stay sober for yourself so that you can be better for all those other reasons. But sobriety is an individual thing.
But your wife and your friends and your children, they might be your inspiration.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. We're saying the same thing.
And I had a conversation with a couple friends at our 4-H fair this week. Men, a little bit younger than me, and like, well, both of them said, "Hey, I'm really proud of you," and maybe I'm drinking too much, or I've told myself, I'm like, "Hey, I was there. If you ever want to talk about it, talk about it." So maybe being a beacon to somebody else. I am not. And if you ever see me trying to be this way, call me to the carpet. I am not up here trying to put myself on a pedestal that I haven't had a bourbon for 239 days. You need to respect me.
I've never heard you talk that way about it. And I've heard you talk a few times about the fact that you go drinking. So, yeah. I applaud you for that, Jim.
I got tired of drinking a full frickin' half gallon of bourbon in 3 days.
Been there. You know, I really thought Jack Daniels was going to go broke when I quit drinking, but I was wrong about that. Guys, one quick bourbon story, right? So in 35 years, I can honestly say I've really not had a desire to drink. But we went to Woodward Reserve on a tour. It was a business. We had a sales meeting. We went to Woodward Reserve, and we went in the cask storage room where they aged the bourbon. When we walked into that giant barn with all those barrels of bourbon, I could have gone for a bourbon that day. That was probably the only time in all the years I had been sober where I thought, "Holy shit, I could go for a bourbon." It was just the smell of the oak. Bourbon and anyhow, I digress.
I gotcha. I haven't had that day where it's like, man. I've had the days where you'd have the habit. Oh, this is a perfect day to go in and do. Yeah.
I'll tell you what.
Your journey.
That's a whole other story.
Oh, you quit that? Oh my gosh! And you're still married.
Yeah, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. Because my gateway back to Copenhagen was cigars. I self-deluded myself. Ooh. I thought, so I'd start smoking cigars, and I love cigars. But yeah, that would eventually take me back to Copenhagen, and then it was just a vicious circle for about 5 years. I just cold turkeyed both of them. I haven't had a cigar or a dip for 5 years now.
Well, good for you. So your sobriety, your walk to Christ, your years of understanding where you wanted to be on the corporate ladder, I think really do need to be talked about. And they should be an inspiration for other people as we are changing the demographics of our business. I think about my son at 25 years old in the job he has, and he's set some boundaries that I don't think I've had the balls to do, and I've been in some pretty powerful roles in the feed industry. So taking lessons from you without taking lessons from you. Like going to Missoula, Montana to be in a rugby tournament and then going camping with his girlfriend in the Grand Tetons and Yellowstone and not having his work phone and not worrying about work. Hell, I went to Hawaii, and every time I took my computer just in case I had to formulate rations. And you know what? Not a single person that I worked with gave a shit that I had it.
Yep.
Sorry to be
These
blunt.
are the worst things that were ever given to us.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's saving this podcast, so.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. Oh, wow. We've had a great conversation. I have to apologize, audience. We don't have Mark's answer to the 5 questions we ask every interview guest. We're having internet problems both in Indiana and Iowa, but we will reconnect with Mark in the future to get his answers to the 5 standard questions I ask every guest. I really appreciate Mark's candor as he talked about his journey in the feed industry, how he started slinging those 100-pound burlap bags in his father's mill in Leicester, Minnesota, all the way to being integral in the consolidation in the swine industry. And I also appreciated his discussion about his journey with Christ and his struggle with alcoholism and how he's been sober for 35 years. Thank you for all the likes, the follows, and the shares. I look forward to sharing more stories as we dive into people's ag roots and how they formed them today. I appreciate any feedback, comments, or suggestions for guests you'd like to see in the future.